We're glad that you're here. We wanted to start today with 3 chairs up front. And in the Jewish tradition, there's often a practice for Passover of having a chair for Elijah or leaving the door open for a stranger to come and join in the Passover meal. So this is a little bit similar to that. We've got 3 chairs, but in this case, they stand for the poor, for non-human life, and for future generations. And our thinking is that we should not make any decision about the environment without having these 3 voices represented. And too often our state legislature and governor have made decisions without those 3 voices being heard. So we recognize the presence of the poor, all non-human life on earth, and future generations. We especially, Gökhan is here from the SEMA Foundation, and we want to recognize that most of his community is made up of people from Turkey. And so people in Turkey and Syria are suffering as a result of the earthquake, so our prayers go out to Gökhan, the SEMA Foundation, and the people of Turkey. So the psalmist says that the mountains clap their hands for joy. The mountains and the clouds clap their hands for joy, and the rivers clap their hands for joy. So we're invited today, as we gather for Environmental Day at the legislature, to join with all creation in celebrating the gifts of the earth. The spiritual leaders up here are not so much here to bless us and bless the earth as to recognize that the earth blesses us all the time. So the call is clap your hands for joy, all people, and we invite you to join together and clap your hands 3 times. Let's try it. Clap your hands for joy, all people.
For the Verde and the Salt, de Santa Cruz and the Gila, de San Pedro and the Mili, Colorado, which give life to the thirsty land. Clap your hands for joy, all the people.
For the indigenous peoples of Arizona who have the wisdom and experience to teach us, to teach us how to live more sustainably on this land. Clap your hands for joy, all people. For 42 organizations that co-sponsored this event and the leadership of St. Sandy Bar, clap your hands for joy for all people.
For Mount Humphrey and Mount Baldy, the Superstitions and Mount Lemmon, and all the peaks and mesas of Arizona that inspire us with their beauty and cause us to lift our eyes in hope. Clap your hands for joy, all people.
For environmental advocates here today who lobby for climate justice and witness to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, clap your hands for joy, all people.
For our mother, Sister Earth, who sustains us day by day, clap your hands for joy, all people.
Clap your hands for joy, all people. Clap your hands for joy, all people. Clap your hands for joy, all people.
St. Sandy, I like this.
Well, thank you so much to Arizona Interfaith Power and Light and all of the folks that helped get us started today. Welcome, everyone, to Environmental Day at the Capitol. Woo! We're here today on the traditional lands of the Akmal Akdam and the Peepash, and we're appreciative of being on these lands and want to keep that in mind as we go through our day. As you know, this year's theme is Arizona Challenges, Arizona Solutions. So we're seeking to create a positive vision for Arizona. And we know there's a lot of bad things going on over in those buildings, but we want to present to them the Arizona that can be, what we need, the positive things that we need. We have a great program, and hopefully you'll be able to meet with some of your legislators either today or subsequent. And I want to thank, I can't name them all, but I want to thank the great planning team and all the team leaders. This is truly a collaborative effort. There have been so many groups involved, so just want to say we really appreciate that. And now I'm going to introduce the legislators because I know they have to get back and fight evil. And our first speaker is Senator Priya Sundaresan. She was elected. She was elected to the Arizona Senate in 2022 to serve in 2023 to represent Legislative District 18. She sits on the Elections, Government, Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committees. She was born and raised in LD 18. She loves Tucson and the opportunities she had for an excellent public education and exploring the outdoors. She teaches natural resources law at the University of Arizona and previously advocated for sustainable resource management with the Environmental Defense Fund. As a voting rights advocate, Senator Sundaresan has led voter protection efforts and engagement on redistricting within the Arizona Democratic Party. Having studied engineering at MIT and law and natural resource economics at the University of Arizona, she knows we need more science-based decision-making in politics, and that's a big reason she's here. As a mother of 2 small children, she wants her children and all children to inherit a sustainable world and a sustainable Arizona. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on, what she's working on. Senator Sundaresan, please.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Can everyone hear me? Or shall I set? There we go. Oh, no. Okay. Thank you so much, Sandy, for inviting me and to speak. I'm really honored and excited to be here speaking to you on this day, Environment Day at the Capitol. Because this is my community. You are my community. I came to the Capitol in order to make change on climate change issues and water issues and all of the important environmental issues that we are facing, we have been facing for decades, and that we need to actually make progress on. And I'm so excited to see everybody represented here because I have formally or informally worked and advocated with a lot of the groups here. As Sandy mentioned, I came back to Tucson after having spent a number of years in DC working on environmental law, energy law issues. First as a lawyer for a law firm, learning a lot about the broad scope and practice of environmental law and energy law. And then for the last 3 years when I was in DC, actually getting to advocate for a living with Environmental Defense Fund, and that was amazing. It introduced me to the work of advocacy that you all are doing. Thank you for your taking time out of your day to join us today. And it's really important because that's the kind of work that I was able to learn about when I was working for Environmental Defense Fund. The amount of education and the important issues that come before these lawmakers are just it's crucial, and it's very important as well to hear from people in the communities and how important these issues are to you. And so here I am now. I just got elected to the state senate. Thank you. And so now we have a number of great environmental advocates in the Democratic caucus as well. And I'm fortunate to be the ranking member on the Senate Natural Resources Committee, which is, they saw me and they were like, go take that role and see what you can do with it. Of course, we can do a lot more when we take the majority, because that's currently what's holding up a lot of the great ideas that the community is advocating for and that we are advocating for, from getting even heard in committees, getting that hearing, getting that public input, making its way into the conversation. So for example, we know that we need to be addressing our water crisis in the state. And we in the Democratic caucus have a number of bills and have long had a number of bills that would improve the situation. For example, we need to be conserving our water resources. We need to have better groundwater management. We had this amazing Groundwater Management Act that was passed in 1980. And it's been over 40 years since we have updated it. And we really need to be doing much, much more with that to close the loopholes in our groundwater management so that we no longer are using our aquifers to the point where we're seeing in areas across the state, people, homeowners who have been living on pieces of land that their wells were able to access the aquifer, that they're no longer able to reach the aquifer because of unlimited corporations still being able to come in, and with unregulated areas, they're not able to have access to water anymore. And we need to also be including conservation and the environmental community into that conversation, and we need to be protecting the use of water for environmental purposes in our water management. And so, and we also have a lot of discussions right now about where are we going to get the water for certain uses, and are we going to be trying to go out and grab new water as if such a thing really exists, new water from elsewhere, and pay lots of money to try to make desalination plants possible in the time? Are these ideas that are possible in the time frame that we need the water, or can we do what our conservation community is talking about and make the existing improvements in efficiency and conservation that will get us a lot of the way where we need to be in terms of a more responsible use of our water resources? And so there are a lot of bills that I've personally introduced and that a lot of the other Senate Democrats have introduced to really strengthen our groundwater management, to make sure that some of those groundwater protections are expanded across the state, to close some of the loopholes that have allowed, even with existing groundwater management, to be able to no longer allow the kind of development that can take advantage of those loopholes and fall within still create subdivisions of 5 or less, and therefore you have these areas that are being mentioned in the news where there are homeowners who suddenly they thought they had access to water and they don't anymore. So we need to take a holistic approach and start putting those kinds of ideas into law so that we have really strengthened our groundwater management. We also need to be, let's talk about energy and climate change, because that is a huge issue of great importance and that we haven't done a whole lot with. Our Corporation Commission is a state agency that, put forward some renewable energy standards a few years ago at this point. They've already, this year, in fact, I think they've basically expired. And by the way, our utilities have met that that standard is fairly low by today's ability to meet those standards. what I'm trying to say is the utilities have already kind of met those standards. We need to update it, and we need to make progress so that we can push our energy providers to really transition to a renewable portfolio in a way that can transition us away from fossil fuel generation. So let's see, what else, what other kinds of, we talked about water, we talked about energy and climate change. Trees and heat mitigation. Okay, well that's a great one. We need to be, very much encouraging more tree cover. We need to protect people from the impacts of heat, as especially climate change makes things worse. I'm proud to say, and keep an eye out for 2 o'clock. I know there's going to be a press conference about a bill that Senator Epstein is running to provide with. And I think CHISPA folks are going to be along with the ride. They've been working with her pretty closely, along with other groups that promote trees. So trying to put trees in schools and address some of that canopy and shade issues in some of our public areas and for our students who need them. So yeah, thanks for that suggestion. That's out there. These are all ideas and bills that our Democratic caucus has put forward and that we would really love to see going forward. I also have introduced a number of electric vehicle bills that would help promote statewide implementation of electric vehicles. These are not my own ideas. These are ideas that I've inherited from my predecessor, Senator Victoria Steele, from the Tucson area, and she had been trying to push those forward, and I want to keep those ideas at the forefront. Let's see, electric vehicles. I think that's another. I want to mention a few more ideas of bills that would address our water issues. So, we know that there are areas across the state that are interested in better, more robust groundwater management. There are fees associated right now that the state agencies are going to assess in order to get them into that kind of more active management areas, and I want to assist them in that process of getting there, and allow them to waive those fees just in the interim period, so that we can get them across the finish line and into that more robust management area. I also I'll end on with one more bill that I'm very excited about, which is addressing one of the major news stories that we saw this past year of the state lands and leases of state lands that have been taken advantage of, in particular by, in this case, by a foreign company that is pumping water and growing alfalfa to then send overseas. And I think we need to be much more responsible of our management of our state resources, including the idea that if you're going to lease state lands and pump water from those lands, then we need to be at least assessing some kind of withdrawal fee for that groundwater. And so these are just examples of ideas of better ways to manage our resources that I would really love to get a hearing, but unfortunately, like many great Democratic ideas, they haven't yet gotten forward. So appreciate all of your advocacy. Talk about these bills, advocate to get those heard, and thank you again for coming and supporting our legislators here in making good environmental choices. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Senator Sundaresan. She also is on the Senate Elections Committee, where she is advocating a lot for democracy. And it's a tough job on that committee, let me tell you. But, all right, well, our next speaker is Representative Stephanie Stahl-Hamilton. Representative Stahl-Hamilton is an Arizonan. She was born in Flagstaff and spent her early childhood years in northeastern Arizona. She attended Eastern Nazarene College in Quincy, Massachusetts, graduating with a BA in Christian education. After earning her Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary, Stephanie and her husband Derek settled in Tucson, Arizona to work and raise their children. Representative Stahl-Hamilton's work with children and teens has been her career focus. serving the Presbyterian Church as a director of Christian education and youth ministry in her local congregation, and statewide as executive director of the Presbyterian Church summer camp. She's also spent years supporting her local school district, serving on site council and PTO substitute teaching and coaching, and in her years here at the legislature has been a huge advocate for environmental protection. Please welcome Representative Saul Hamilton.
Thank you, Sandy. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a privilege to be here this morning. And I think before we can address challenges, there needs to be a little bit of truth-telling that we do. And sometimes telling the truth is not very comfortable. So I invite you to join with me on some truth-telling and ask you to hang with me as we step through a lot of the challenges that our state is facing in regards to the environment and climate and our water resources. I will be addressing climate, environmental justice, and water. And so we know that the time has come to prioritize our precious water, our precious resources with direct and unrelenting action. Arizona has been in a drought so severe that the term drought no longer accurately describes the conditions we're in. After years of Democratic leadership on responsible natural resource management, the Arizona legislature successfully passed a bipartisan water bill that gave Arizona many necessary tools to strengthen water infrastructure, conservation efforts, and long-term augmentation. But we must do so much more. And in the area of climate, we are in a climate crisis that impacts every sector of our economy and every aspect of our lives, and we have less time to address it than we previously thought. Arizona is among the fastest warming states in the United States and is considered number 4. The number of dangerous heat days is expected to increase from 50 to 80 by the year 2050. And with increasingly frequent and deadly fire seasons, global temperatures on the rise, and an unprecedented mega drought, it's more obvious than ever that without swift legislative action, the crisis will only get worse. Many of my colleagues have been too busy relitigating the 2022 election, trying to make voting harder, putting targets on the backs of our LGBTQ children, and working to dismantle our public education system. We need your voice to put climate action at the top of the agenda. Everything we love about this state and everyone we love in it depends on the actions we take. And because of that, that's why Leader Cano introduced House Bill 2279, which repeals the Republican-led legislature's archaic ban on state-level regulation of greenhouse gas emissions, which, in doing so, will enable Governor Hobbs to tackle the climate crisis as soon as she can sign this bill. In the arena of environmental justice, now that we've got a Democratic governor who actually believes in climate change, there is no time to waste. But as we roll up our sleeves and begin to address the climate crisis head on, it's imperative that we center these solutions around those who experience most directly the consequences of decades of inaction. Communities of color across the state, from the Navajo Nation to Nogales, are all too familiar with this state's history of disregarding the health of natural environment that these very communities have cared for generations, and they're bearing the brunt of the impacts of our warming climate. And that's why Representative De Los Santos has introduced HCR 2013, which adds an amendment to the state constitution stating that all people have the inalienable right to a clean and healthy environment that the state must conserve and protect. He also introduced House Bill 2244, which holds polluters accountable for these injustices by requiring the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to adopt a list of burdened communities, assign a representative, and help communities limit expansion or new construction of facilities that have environmental impacts. On the topic of water, while most of my colleagues might not agree with me, the adults in the room know we can't talk about the mega drought without acknowledging that it is driven by the climate crisis. The fact of the matter is, Arizona is ground zero for the climate crisis, and there's nothing that illustrates this better than the rapidly declining water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at the lowest levels since their construction and are unlikely to refill in our lifetime. Despite a wet winter with abundant rain and snowfall, the Colorado River remains over-allocated, and Lake Mead and Lake Powell remain at risk of dead pool by 2025, meaning the dams will no longer be able to generate power. Legislative Democrats made meaningful progress when we negotiated the modernization of the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, which included $200 million for water conservation projects. But our reservoirs continue to dwindle, and our groundwater supplies, especially in rural areas, are in peril. And that's why I've introduced House Bill 2165, which applies assured water supply requirements for development statewide, putting a stop to unfettered development without the water to support it. And it's also why I've introduced House Bill 2522, which establishes watershed health as a beneficial use to obtain water rights. That way we can start leaving water in rivers and streams for the sake of the ecosystem and the environment. And while the outlook sounds grim, by no means am I suggesting that we throw in the towel. To the contrary, our wins in 2022 have Democratic policymakers more motivated than ever to get to work and pass common sense policies while we still can. We have a responsibility to ensure our current and future generations have access to clean air, clean and abundant water, and pristine, conserved wildlands that make our state one of the most beautiful and unique places in the world. Thank you for your time.
Was everyone able to hear okay? I should have asked that away. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Representative Saul Hamilton. All right. Our next speaker is Nicole Horseherder. Nicole is the Executive Director of Tunajoniani Sacred Water Speaks. And there she works to protect the waters of Dinata, her tribal homeland in the Black Mesa region of the Navajo Nation. Nicole's work has been featured in a number of publications, including on NPR, PBS, and in the Arizona Republic, and she's well known for her advocacy work. In 2019, Nicole was recognized by Elle magazine as one of the world's leading female voices, I would just say leading voices, in the fight against anthropogenic climate change. And in 2021, Time magazine heralded her water rights advocacy on behalf of the Navajo Nation. Nicole holds a Master's of Arts in Linguistics from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Nicole's continued to follow the traditions of her people, traditions which inform her work as an activist. And just this year, earlier, she came down to the Capitol and was advocating with legislators for a just and equitable transition for coal-impacted communities like the one in which she lives, and she's going to talk to us about that work. And Nicole, come on up.
Yate. Good afternoon, everyone. Somebody has already started the action without us. So I wanted to talk about, I was asked to talk about just transition, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about just transition in terms of my community and what that means for us. Because when we were asked about just transition, it means a lot of different things. But basically transition is, when you're moving from one thing to another thing. And for us, that means energy transition, and it means economic transition, and it means a lot of times the way that we deal with, like, say, industry and utilities. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that means through the little snippets of stories that I've put together for you, stories and experiences. So one, I just wanted to say, know where your lights come from, know where your water comes from, and know where your food comes from. That is really, really important. For a community that has been made to commit so much of its coal and water for the delivery of cheap power to Phoenix, Tucson, LA, and Las Vegas, we've had to grapple with, in recent years, the protection of our aquifers and our surface water and all our waters up in the Black Mesa region, which is in northeast Arizona. From industry mismanagement, industry use, industry misreporting, and just ignoring all the data out there about how much water they're using and how that's impacting the aquifers and the rivers. But also we've had to begin to figure out what comes next, what comes after coal mining is done, because the only coal in Arizona is in northeast Arizona, and it happens to be on our tribal lands on the Navajo Nation. And if you're wondering, how we were able to get cheap electricity and water to this, to Phoenix and to Tucson, well, it started in the headwaters of Black Mesa. What comes next for us means that when the power plants come down and the coal mining stops, for us, it has meant that we need to bring stakeholders back to the table and try to get them to come back and support the communities that have been reliant on them for in the case of Navajo Generating Station and the Black Mesa Coal for the last 50 years. we want to work together with the same stakeholders that have just been ripping us off for the last 50 years, but to come back together and try to get renewable energy on those transmission lines that are now idle from the closed coal plants, and commit to buying Navajo renewable energy and continue partnerships in this way. You know, when the coal plants come down and the infrastructure comes down and the lands are reclaimed, the transmission lines is something that usually don't come down. They're very valuable. They're very expensive. Utilities usually want to come back and use it for something else. And before they can put more coal on there, more oil, more gas, whatever, fossil fuel, we need to make sure that renewable energy goes on those transmission lines instead of anything else. The other thing that we're trying to work on is to make sure that we're proposing to stakeholders that they don't have to use the transmission lines in this way. We'd like them to, but if, you know, say it's not a utility who, maybe they've used all their transmission lines for something else. But in any case, if they want to support coal-impacted communities, they can support in different ways, such as providing like direct support to the communities for the development of roads, water infrastructure. Because for nations like us who have been made to commit our water and have been prohibited from using river water to develop our communities because we've had to commit it to the power plant, all of it, we end up 100 years or so behind the rest of the nation. So one of the questions we always get is people are baffled about why there's so many homes in Northeast Arizona without indoor plumbing, without running water, without electricity. And this is the reason, is because industry makes communities like ours commit all their water to power plants like the NGS. And how does that happen? It happens when there's a monolingual speaking group reliant on English-speaking attorneys supposed to be representing them, and signing lease agreements that are completely one-sided, where all the benefits flow to the utility and to the ratepayers and to the communities that these ratepayers live, and all the benefits flow away from these communities such as mine. So we're asking, you know, like through the Arizona Corporation Commission, we're bringing back utilities to the table and saying, hey, let's continue a partnership, but let's continue partnerships that are mutually beneficial instead of just one way. Another important aspect of just transition is to make reality community benefits. And that is to ensure that, like I said before, that these one-sided contracts are not recreated again, but to make sure that economic projects going forward are sustainable and equitable. No longer can we benefit, can the benefits just flow in one direction, and only the shareholders and the executives pocket, you know, the profits. Just transition, finally, one last aspect I wanted to cover about just transition is cleanup. So in every fossil fuel contract that's probably ever been written, we never wrap those things up. We always just end at wherever operations stop, and then we end up with a lot of coal mines and power plants that sit there in the landscape and need to be cleaned up, and that still are spewing like contaminants and still leaching contaminants into the ground, and there's still, you know, ponds sitting there that need to be cleaned up, and so on and so forth. Lease agreements and contracts going forward, although I disagree that this is the way we should continue to do business, but you know, I understand, especially here in Arizona, that especially being an indigenous person, that our voice is very much diminished, that our power is much smaller. And so we're going to see a lot more of these fossil fuel companies knocking at our door and wanting to do business on the Navajo Nation. But going forward, these lease agreements need to talk about robust and complete cleanup, need to have good reclamation plans, need to make sure they're bonding the water, and have funds set aside for complete reclamation and to address any damages that, especially to the water, that happens when they come back and do business. Furthermore, I think an important piece of language that needs to be added to these new leases and contracts is transition. And that is, how do we help the communities move on after we leave? And that's an important aspect that I know has never been calculated into any of the contracts. That it's important to, you know, this, you know, being a good neighbor, and to, sorry, I lost my place here. So I think these last little bits of the pieces, I think, are absent in these lease agreements, and I think those are important parts that need to be added going forward. We always say we're living in a water crisis here in Arizona. We always say there is a water crisis. We always talk about how we've got to do better and manage our water better. In Northeast Arizona, let me tell you, we are living the water crisis, and we have been living it for a few decades now. Ever since Peabody Coal Company came into our community, we have begun to haul water, primarily for our household and our livestock and our farming. This is going backwards. You know, people always think that there's going to be prosperity and some jobs from fossil fuel projects. That's misleading. That, you know, I would warn communities that you'll never see that prosperity. Instead, they come in and they drain the aquifers and they leave the place a lot worse off than before. We used to have springs and seeps everywhere, all across Black Mesa, and those are no more. And hydrologists tell us that it's going to be at least 20 years or more before we might possibly see the springs and the seeps return. And so in 50 years, a whole community's water source has, you know, disappeared, has been destroyed. We've got to do better. Here in Arizona, we live in this very delicate desert balance, and we've got to do a better job understanding the land that we live in and the environment that